So good afternoon and welcome to the College of Information Studies Dean Lecture Series. This is the one that we're giving this semester. So I'm so delighted you have come to join us and hear our talk. Just reminding you, as you already know, this is being recorded. And if you have questions to Jon, please enter them in the Q&A session. And then when we get to the Q&A part, I'll be moderating that discussion. So thank you. So today it's my great pleasure to be introduced to you Dr. Jon P. Gant. He's a professor and dean at North Carolina Central University School of Library and Information Science. Dr. Gant is a leader in higher education who helps make information and digital technologies accessible for everyone. Jon has published numerous research studies on the disparities in broadband adoption, a topic we're concerned about in Maryland, the future of work in information technology, and advances in digital government. Most recently, Jon's research and public engagement improves digital equity and inclusion in urban and rural communities worldwide, particularly to support human development and achievement, democratic engagement, and the transformation of communities and community anchor institutions. Jon currently serves as professor and dean of the School of Library and Information Science at North Carolina Central University. He received his master's and PhD from Carnegie Mellon University, where he trained in public policy, information systems, and strategy. Sounds like the Heinz School to me. Jon earned his undergraduate degrees at the University of Michigan. So without further ado, let me turn this over to Jon.
Thank you, Keith, and hello, everyone. Very glad to be here. And Keith, thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. It's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to speak to everyone that's here, and we're making a recording for folks to be able to look at it later as well, too. And I have about a 40-minute presentation or so, and given where we are in the schedule of the year, that we're winding up the school year, we're looking towards the holidays, Christmas and New Year's, that by design, I've geared this talk so we can have more conversation as well. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so the focus of my talk is really looking at the digital divide and this idea of what I call the digital mismatch. We're pretty aware the divide is this, in general, this issue where we have a gap between who has access to computers and so forth. And then there's this mismatch part too, where we are, trying our best to find remedies to these problems, but yet a lot of solutions still don't really meet the mark. Often the designs of them have inherent biases and issues that really don't meet the needs of everyone. And I really think we're at a point of what I'm calling now I think we are in officially the new digital equity era, where there's a real call to action and a great opportunity for our universities, for our iSchools, our library and information science programs, our colleagues across campus, all to work together to try and figure out solutions to these problems. So much of this talk is a reflection on kind of a body of work I've been doing over the last 15 or 20 years. And part of it is heavily influenced by where I sit now in my role of leading a school, and where I have to think about enrollments, I have to think about faculty development, student development, keeping, when it rains, make sure the building doesn't leak, all kinds of things like that. But most importantly, trying to figure out how do we direct, do I direct with my leadership team the intellectual focus of our school, and the digital divide is very near and dear to my heart. So I've been thinking about it from that lens of trying to say, what can we do from the university to help bridge this digital divide? And as I'm going along, you can post questions in the chat and they'll let me know, and then we'll certainly save time at the end for more conversation too. But for me, just in a quick nutshell, when the computer came out and the Mac came out in the 80s, for me it was very much a life-changing type of tool. I grew up in Michigan, and my dad, who's actually pictured here in this at work, he worked for one of the chemical companies in Michigan, where I grew up. And he had multiple sclerosis, and the thing that made the huge difference for him, he was a chemist. He went to North Carolina A&T and HBCU here in Greensboro. It's in Greensboro, just down the road from Durham. And as a scientist, he certainly had high level creativity and things he wanted to do, but the MS over time was taking away his hands and so forth. And when the Mac came out, he was fortunate to work in a company where they purchased one for him, and that just continued to open the door for him to do his creative work, his scientific work, and so forth. And I got to see firsthand how important it is to think about this technological change and think about what does it take for us to adopt and use technology in a way that's a benefit for everyone. In grad school, I was very inspired by this nonprofit in San Francisco, the Guide Memorial Church, where they, very also at the same time when, Macs were coming out, they said, hey, let's build labs, let's open it up so that the public can use these kinds of things. And, and give young people who might be on the other side of the digital divide a chance to dream and the skills and know-how so that they could be your next MIS department. And that inspired me in much of my career in thinking about this digital divide. And as we know, the digital divide, it really breaks down into, three types of divide, right? First is that access divide, who has access, who doesn't. It looks affordability and things like that. We then talk about the use divide, having the right set of skills to be able to, the digital literacy skills get around for computing and so forth. But then there's also this quality of use gap. There's just really hard to understand, really hard to measure, but it's really thinking about those outcomes. How do I take my skills, the things I want to do, but yet achieve the outcomes that I want? How do I go out and learn how to use the computer to do what I need to do to find a job and so forth, and be successful in achieving that particular outcome? I've got a new idea for a business and so forth. And how do I actually achieve that outcome of being able to use the computer, software, and so forth to be able to do that? So we call that quality of use gap. But at the end, these are just different types of divides that are out there. And they go along with other divides that we know. We see the differences among demographics, between, division by age, by gender, and by race. There are significant divides. The urban-rural divide remains the largest divide that we've got to deal with in our world. In the US, the gap between US developing countries in terms of rural access is, about a threefold difference. So we've got serious divides that are out there. And so we have, serious challenges in trying to figure out how do we overcome some of these technical and financial aspects to utilizing technology, as well as, to make sure we've got greater access across the internet. So, and then as we have continued to progress from the mainframe era to the PC era to this mobile era to now where we're in this data-driven predictive platform space with algorithms driving so much of what we want to do to help personalize our experiences and so forth, we have very significant trade-offs there because we have to give up so much of ourselves in order to benefit from the experiences that the software developers and companies are trying to provide in the digital space. So it creates a different type of divide here that we have to think about when we think about the data that we give up, how it's being used, what rights do we have over it, and what responsibilities do the company that, the large companies that own the corpus of all this data, what are they doing with it as well too, and be able to understand that and trust that and so forth. And then you all, I'm sure, saw many of the hearings recently where, look at Facebook and others, trying to dig into these particular types of issues to figure out what should be done as well. But it's certainly another trade-off that we have to think about. But when we look at these level divides, what we get into what we call the second and third level divide, one of our assistant professors here at North Carolina Central is Dr. Rizi Agbo. She's on leave this year, and she's at USC at the Annenberg School, working there on a large project looking at broadband affordability that's been funded by the Pew and the California Emerging Technology Fund. But in her work, where a co-author with her in one of the papers is looking at saying, yeah, the second and third level divide is really showcasing those deep divides where being connected is not enough, where we do have great challenges in trying to figure out how to really use computers to make a difference in our life from day to day. So what's driving these challenges are, of course, great shifts that happen dynamically as technology evolves. Secondly, certainly the pandemic revealed all kinds of issues, from, well, the fact now that we're sitting here on Zoom, and we've had to shift from school to online, our work, our life has really become functional only if we have good access to broadband. And we also have great comfort in being able to use the different applications that are out there so we can take care of, educating our children or ordering food or dealing with medical issues or working, frankly, or getting an appointment for a booster and things like that. And then the third issue is that this is what we call a grand challenge, right? Because this is an issue that's very much a public problem. It's an issue that one person, one organization, one institution owns this particular issue. It's an issue that's very much a shared problem among all of us. And so that makes it hard for us to really get our hands around how do we solve the problems to make things better. And then also, as we dig down closer and we particularly look at those use type of divides, we know there's great challenges in terms of the extent to which people are comfortable, the factors that shape a person's acceptance and use of technology. The solutions that we need to build in our community require us to work together with multiple stakeholders to try and make our communities more digitally inclusive and equitable. And then the software, the tools themselves are, for many of us, a black box. And the way in which they're designed are really shaped by the values of the companies, the institutions they build them, and frankly, the people that are on the front lines hacking out the code and things like that. So there's a lot of factors here that make this a complex problem that we truly need to sort out. So we are in this, what I call this digital equity and inclusion era, for this simple fact that in this last couple of months, at a policy level, we've seen a pretty significant turnaround at the federal level in the United States with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. In there is a little over $60 billion that's dedicated to building more broadband access to help break down the urban-rural divides, getting more connection out in rural areas. And it also embedded there is the Digital Equity Act, which focuses on funding strategies to help support the expansion of digital literacy skills and the availability of devices, affordable broadband, and things like that. And these are all done because we are seeing now that if we don't address the digital divide sufficiently enough, we will have problems where there's continually more people living in isolation, not being able to be connected to one another. Our barriers to education, barriers to economic opportunity, and we certainly, have seen a widening in various forms of discrimination, whether you're looking by gender or by race or by age, as well. So there's a lot at stake here, but there's also a great opportunity now to move forward in addressing this. So my focus here today is to ask this question: is what can we do from the viewpoint of a university? Specifically, what can we do from the viewpoint of our library and information science programs, our iSchools community, to help address these particular issues? And I'll give you the punchline now, and then we'll go through this in more detail. But I really think there's three things here that I want to focus on today. There's many others, but the three that I will focus on today are the following. First, that let's look at how we envision our strategies to work with the public from the university's point of view. One of the things that I think a lot about is whether or not the university is working with their communities that they are embedded with. We often hear about divides even in trying to work on problems together because of the perspective of the institutions that are working together. And through a fellowship that I just completed with the Kettering Foundation, I've been challenged over the last couple of years to really think about this as part of my fellowship, to really think about what does it mean to really create systems where universities can work with the people, and how can we envision or evolve strategies to work with the public. And I mean that word "with" very significantly, and we'll talk about that. Secondly, how do we make our college classroom a rehearsal space for democracy, to be a place where we can engage and deliberate on these controversial issues, particularly where we want to be able to bring in the aspect of looking at problems, working together to design solutions, to implement those solutions, scale them, maintain them over time as well. So how do we create that rehearsal space for designing and building things, digital things that we all do, in a way that we can engage in the democratic forums across our world, and deal with these issues. And then thirdly, when we look across the university, as exciting as they are, we have challenges. One of the great challenges is that we tend to have different isolated pockets of engagement happening across campus. Over on the engineering campus, they may be involved with some issues. Then you may be in your iSchool or in the humanities or in other units that are working on similar problems, but they're working in isolation. So how do we bring together, the great mindset and passion, compassion that we have across our campus to work together, especially to design and build systems that are very much large scale types of systems as well. So the examples, so what I want to do is illustrate this with some small little case studies based from my own experience. So I've been dean here at North Carolina Central since 2016. And prior to that, I was a professor at the University of Illinois at the iSchool there. And while at Illinois, I founded the Center for Digital Inclusion. So some of the examples that I will bring today will come from my experience here at North Carolina Central, and also from my experience at the University of Illinois. But this whole notion of looking at the university as an institution to work with the people really comes from this fellowship I have with the Kettering Foundation. The Kettering Foundation is very focused on looking at democracy. How do we design our institutions so that people can work together to really work and solve tough problems? The CEO of the Kettering Foundation is Dr. David Matthews, and through the couple decades that he's been in that role, he's developed this book that he calls With the People. And let me just read a quote about the book itself to kind of help frame this important point. The book itself offers a strategy for bridging some of the divides separating the people of the United States from their government and from their country's major institutions. It envisions a form of collaboration that would have institutions working with citizens, not just for them. Such a with strategy sees people as creators and producers rather than consumers or clients. It encourages collaboration through mutually reinforcing efforts between citizenry and the government, and that could have a cumulative effect on the troubles our democracy faces. And this has had a big influence for me. In my fellowship, I'm a Wissington scholar, so I was part of a cohort of, I guess is the 10th cohort of scholars from historically black colleges and university that have had 2 years to really take on a particular problem. And mine was to look at what role universities can play using these types of deliberative democracy and pedagogy to really work with the public to address issues around the digital divide. So much of what I'm presenting is from that fellowship. And so this with strategy is one where it's not the university parachutes into our communities around us and tells the community, this is what you ought to do. And it's not the strategy where we're the hired guns to figure out solutions to problems and so forth. But instead, it's a strategy that says, how do we basically, as I say in my own faith tradition, how do you love your neighbor as yourself, right? How do you reach out and really put yourself in the shoes and work with your neighbor to provide? So if somebody's hungry or needs to be clothed or needs to be housed, needs to be healthcare issues taken care of, how do we work with each other to provide that, especially when we've got big, large problems to deal with? We look at climate, we look at big issues like that. It takes working with each other to be able to do that. And it's a very challenging process for doing it. So one of the things I raise as a strategy is for universities specifically, is to look how we can leverage our classrooms as a place to help students rehearse how to participate in a with sort of mindset in solving tough problems. And I think we have the extra challenge in terms of our leadership with information science programs and library science programs, is how do we design and build either new systems, new applications, new software, to be able to do this in a way that promotes equity and inclusion and diversity as well too. So while at Illinois, I founded with a group of colleagues the Center for Digital Inclusion. We built this center on about 30 years of prior work at what was called GISLIS, the Graduate School Library of Information Science, that started with PrairieNet, which was one of the very first public labs that was open for folks, anybody to come on campus, to get on computers, to get on the, eventually then get on the internet and so forth. And through that, we brought together faculty from across the iSchool and across the university to all work together, focused on how do we really promote the use of information communication technologies to make our society better, right? And how do we bring the research that we're doing on campus, and we put it in different forms of public engagement to really make an impact across society. And so we worked on about $35 million worth of projects that range from including building one of the first municipal gigabit broadband networks in the country. So as many of you may recall, back in the late 2000s, as part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the Department of Commerce created the Broadband Technology Opportunity Program. And this program funded 3 types of projects, and one of which was to build new infrastructure, middle mile, and in some cases, in a couple cases, last mile. So the University of Illinois, in partnership with the city of Urbana and the city of Champaign, Illinois, collaborated together and received this grant to build a new fiber network. In the proposal, one of the criteria, at least to be eligible for funding, was to clearly demonstrate the number of underserved and unserved households in both Urbana and Champaign in terms of internet access. And so part of my team, what we did initially was we canvassed every single household in eligible neighborhoods and census tracts and went door to door to ask folks, what kind of computers, do you have computers at home? What kind of computer access do you have, and so forth? And in there, we're able to identify neighborhoods that were underserved and unserved, and then we're able then to build this broadband network that created 7 different rings around the city and around the university, and built one of the fastest networks in the country. And the other cool part about this is that the first homes that were connected with this were those homes that were in those underserved or unserved neighborhoods first. And then all the community anchor institutions that served households in those neighborhoods as well. Then we spun it off into a nonprofit that then was, we then had a merger with a private company that was later bought out by another company. So now we spun it off into a private sector run ISP as well. But through this project, going to the point about building classroom as this space for students to learn about how to deal with tough problems in democracy, we intentionally used a community-focused participatory approach to go out and learn about the needs in the community and get use that opportunity for our friends and family and neighbors across the city to help shape where this network is going to go, the priorities for connecting folks, the creation of a community benefit fund to help on the digital literacy side, help with the governance, help with the work, they were eligible for contracting and working on different aspects and so forth. And we brought students in from the very beginning, and we brought this into our classroom and various classrooms for students to be a part of this process. So some of the faculty members that were heavily engaged with the digital divide work used their classrooms as places for students to go out and engage with the public and have these hard conversations about what should we do to deal with the digital divide. And that helped shape the design and implementation of this entire project. And through this, we were able then also to frame our approach from that diffusion of innovation approach by thinking about the acceptance and use of the technology. And that gave us, I think, much sharper insight into thinking about how do we solve this problem. Because one of the things that happened in all the forums that we did, I think we probably held about 40 or 50 different forums across our community, was that we heard all kinds of stories about how folks were left behind, what it meant, and so forth. And it was hard to figure out the buckets for the, where to place that information. And this acceptance and use model was very influential for us to really help us to shape how to organize and structure all this very valuable information that we're gaining and insight. And it really focused on this very particular issue where we knew a lot of people said, yeah, we'd love to have the broadband service, but there was always this gap we had to deal with that in terms of actually signing up and using the service. And so we had to figure out how do we overcome that gap using this participatory type of approach. And so from there, that's where we learned a great deal about those factors that were holding things back. Affordability was a large thing, but in addition to that was having computers, having the right skill set. But then I think the other thing behind the scenes that we weren't so prepared for was this trust issue, because there was a big issue of whether you could trust the university and could you trust the two cities in building this network, and the question is, what are you guys going to do with all this data that's running through the network? And are you going to be using it? And this was being built at the same time that Google was doing their initial launch of Google Fiber, where it was pretty well known that that this is a way for folks to look at traffic and to try and figure out what folks are doing and things like that. So there were a lot of factors that we had to deal with. But what was pretty incredible about this is that we had a large number of students that were working with the public, trying to wrestle with the trade-offs of how to make these investments, how to set the priorities, and then how to move things forward. Through this, it turns out that we had roughly over 35 different graduate assistants that worked on different parts of the project. 7 of those graduate assistants earned their PhDs using some work that was from here. And those 7 of all now are tenured associate professors, and one's a MacArthur Fellow as well. And so it was a very fertile ground for using this as a classroom to really wrestle with some of these very tough issues around broadband adoption. And so in our approach, we had our students out there in the field, going door to door, which gave them firsthand. They could, they were equipped from end to end with iPads, and they could actually do some computer demonstration and training on the spot. We built all kinds of applications so we could streamline the process of gathering data from the field, pumping that into our GIS, into our engineering system, into the network system, design system, CAD system, and figure out the engineering graphics and things like that as well too. And we had students working on all aspects of this, but doing it in a way where they were using rapid prototyping, working with the public to really help shape the design of many of the applications that were used to put together the customer service system and so forth and the engineering systems for this project. A second thing that we encountered, of course, that we see is this notion that there's a lot of engagement happening across our campuses. What is exciting about the university is that there are great places for discovery and invention. They're great places where we're proprietors of trying to figure out how to take these ideas and scale them so that they can be used in the public. And then also we're the conscience, trying to evaluate and critique the extent to which the benefits of these innovations and so forth, such in broadband and digital technologies, are really reaching folks as they should. And so in that conscience, we know that across campus, we see a lot of work that's happening. And one of the problems that I saw even from my experience at Illinois, of course, was that in creating the center especially, it was one of the first times that we started bringing together different parts of campus to work together. We had a chance to receive a grant from the provost's office. It was an internal grant to look at that particular issue, and in particular work with the extension service at the university to figure out how do we bring together these islands of engagement so they could work strategically in a strategic fashion together to help serve the needs across the state of Illinois, especially in the rural downstate areas. So we created a program called the Digital Innovation Leadership Program. And this was, I'll tell everybody, this was one of the best grants I've ever worked on because the dollars were so flexible, because we had a mission to figure out solutions without being encumbered with a lot of constraints with our budget. So it was great working with the Extension Service, in particular, Illinois' land grant school. And the Extension Service is amazing because they are representatives in every single county across the state. And when I say that, what I mean is these weren't folks that just sort of knew, the players. These are folks that went to church with the folks that we were working with, school, they were neighbors. They knew each other, so that when we worked together, we created this large mobile fab lab, and we would go throughout the state and we would do training in data science, artificial intelligence, the fab lab. So we're doing all the makerspace stuff, which was a blast, and digital media production and digital manufacturing. And this was great because we were able to give hands-on experiences all across the state. But at the same time, we were looking at this as a model of saying, how do we bring together the multiple units from across campus to work across the different communities? So we had folks from engineering, from the business school, from labor and employment relations, the iSchool, of course, and art and design as well. So we were able to bring in many of the notions around like empathic design as an approach for thinking about for teaching it and learning around the areas that we focus on. We were bringing in design thinking, computational thinking. We had folks in the business school were one guy, and one professor in particular, was just brilliant around entrepreneurship. And so that was a big part of doing digital entrepreneurship as part of this as well too. And so that took it from just saying, hey, here's some cool technologies for you guys to tinker and play with, but we did it in a context that we really had important learning outcomes that would really help people advance, achieve certain outcomes in their life, like how to start a business, how to take care of other things that you really wanted to do. And so this really helped us to think more about what it means to bring together these faculty members from different parts of campus to work together. It was very important to do because we were able to develop a model where we could look at that whole creation process as a shared process across campus. So that when we'd work with groups, we would take them through design thinking procedures with multidisciplinary instructors. And so they could get this 360-degree view around the problem that they were trying to solve. And so it really helped to open people's eyes. One, it gave folks the opportunity to see things from a different perspective. Particularly when we would emphasize the empathic design side of it, because that's where we could really infuse the equity and inclusion part of it. And it really helped folks to rethink, different solutions that we were working on for the communities. And so it really is great. We brought in our stakeholders that corresponded with our discipline. So we worked with schools, libraries, private sector firms. We're also part of our community that work together. So this really created small networks within communities with multiple stakeholders that were all working then together to use these kinds of tools to solve important problems. One big problem that we were looking at was drainage issues down in the southern part of the state. As the water table flows down into the Mississippi, and drainage in the small towns is a really large problem. So we did a lot of GIS and mapping types of tools, and we would bring the community members around looking at the water flow. We do modeling and things like that. And then we would have these stakeholder meetings to talk about solutions. But then part of the training that the public would go through is that they would hear these solutions, and then they would go implement what they heard into like the GIS tools, then to make maps, to do presentations, to further the conversation to help find solutions and things like that. We had some people tinkering with, there's an area near East St. Louis where there were a group of folks looking at prototypes for building some drainage barriers. And so we did some modeling on a small scale, doing 3D modeling of different water systems so that they could model the design of the drainage barriers as well, and use that as a way to talk about possible solutions for fixing some drainage issues in around the East St. Louis area. So that's kind of what those are a large part of the types of things that we did as well. And also through the center, we had a number of other grants, and we eventually trained between this grant and a couple of others, about 17,000 people on various digital literacy skills using this multi-stakeholder team to be able to do that as well. And this really helped us to think more about, kind of a more effective model for human development in the digital age. Then lastly, this engagement with the public. So as I, just finished graduation last week, we had graduated 73 students, the largest class ever. And as we're going through graduation, I was thinking about what's next for them and what does it mean now that you're graduating in terms of what can you go out and do to really help make a difference based on what we've taught you in our program. And so in our program here at Central, we center our curriculum around bringing real projects like most everybody does here on the call, but working with the public to address really tough issues. So one example here is Dr. Alex Chazanoff. She's got a grant that's called Hacking into History. And this grant tells the story of the racially restrictive agreements that are contained in property deeds. And a lot of people may not be aware of this. There have been some news stories on NPR lately about this, but if you look at deep inside of deeds, there's often racially restrictive language that's in there. But the problem that we have is that those deeds have not been digitized in a way that we can quickly go through and find this information and try and do further research on it. So Dr. Chazanoff, an assistant professor here at School of Library and Information Sciences, is working with libraries, civic organizations, community members to basically crowdsource the digitizing of all of these deeds. And it's really, and it's a project where it uses a process that is very democratic, where everybody decides, even down to the taxonomy of how you're going to, for this and the metadata and things like that, to help reduce bias and so forth. And so this is really what the folks who are involved with love about it, is that they feel empowered to go in and really understand how to use computer technology to really bring that information to life as well. And they also are learning how to work with different organizations, some who have competing interests in dealing with this problem as well too. A second is Dr. Siobhan Grady, also another assistant professor here of computer science in our program, has a new lab called the Lab for Artificial Intelligence and Equity Research, or the LAIR. They're working on a number of different projects, from authorship attribution, HCI, artificial intelligence. They've got also a grant dealing with self-navigating cars as well. And in this, all of the grants have a common theme, that each grant has a group of stakeholders that they are working with to really come up with new solutions to deal with some of these very tough problems. And that has really opened the eyes of our students as to new ways of coming up with design, coming up with new solutions and things like that. One of the students, in fact, said to me that it'd be so much simpler that if we could just come up with the ideas and then tell the public that we're working with, our stakeholders, what the solution is. And I said to him, well, that's the quickest way to get thrown out the door, right? Because you really want to bring the public into these problems and work with you. So that's been the center of their work. And so one example is the STEM It Yourself. It's one to really help create a STEM identity among adolescent girls, 10 to 16-year-olds, so that they may consider going into computer science or in the STEM fields and things like that. And from the very first day, the question came up, especially about coding, is what is it that you want to do? And it was very much about how to empower the stakeholders and about shaping their curriculum, shaping what they're doing. And then they learn how to use participatory approaches for designing solutions, for designing applications that they then coded themselves. And one of the young women remarked about how she really liked it because she felt confident that, I think the game that she built really met the needs of the younger students that she was trying to help. And they were trying to teach about issues of respect and things like that in the classroom and in the community. And so it's those kinds of approaches that I think are ways in which we can at least increase the likelihood that our solutions can make a difference. So, I've talked a lot here, and I want to be able to save some time for questions and more conversation, but I really think universities are in a place where we can go, as it's kind of cliche to say, but really continue the work that we're doing and deepen the way in which we work with our communities to address the digital divide. There are critical issues in terms of access. How do we break that rural divide. There's no question about that. There's no question about there's great challenges in helping to build skills and so forth. But certainly this last challenge of this usage divide is one where I think it's the stickiest problems trying to solve. And you would say, why is the digital divide even a divisive problem? And I've been working some with digital divide leaders in our state, and you find that the problems are around how do we pay for these types of things, the affordability of it, and the priorities. When we look at access, there's no question that we would love to see everybody connected, but then the challenge is, well, there's only so many dollars to do that. So what's the priority? If you looked at the FCC hearings last week, Gigi Sohn, who's said in her remarks, is the problem is the priority, and the priority ought to be connecting the unconnected first, and then the underserved next. And that is a very large divisive debate. Another access question is, are the networks open? When we built UC2B, we built it as an open access network so that anybody who wanted to start their own ISP could use the network, the middle mile and the last mile for their network. And we had to do that with, we had to open our network. We invited the incumbents in town to use it and a couple small startups who were directly competing against the ISP that we created to use the network. And it's a funny situation, but if we took a step back and said, it's not the competition is important for driving down the affordability, but the competition is also important because we're going to make sure that at least everybody in town has an option for being connected to the internet. So it does change your mindset. And I think using the classroom, using our university resources as a space to think about these things is a great way to help address these particular issues as well. So with that, let me open it up for Q&A.
So, Jon, thank you very much. And yes, let's do the Q&A. I'll start off with a question.
Sure.
You mentioned how PrairieNet was part of the, or funded part of the Broadband Technology Opportunity Program, or BTOP, which, as I recall, was a $1.2 trillion program. It was.
Yeah,
it was huge.
The BTOP program. So there was a top program 10 years before that. BTOP was the second incarnation of it. BTOP was a $4.7 billion program.
Okay.
And then the new broadband infrastructure bill is $65 billion.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I remember that there was a lot of criticism how the funding that flowed out of BTOP did good things, but it didn't really do a lot in terms of building up the partnerships between universities and communities and applications such to address the kind of design, co-design you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I was curious how you felt about this new infrastructure bill. Have we learned from the past, or do you have ideas how we can move forward?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So when the BTOP bill came out, there were three different legs, for funding: infrastructure, digital literacy, and building public computing centers. And I was the director for the evaluation of the whole BTOP program too. So I got a chance to, go to 44 different sites and cities and so forth and evaluate this. And so that was the question that we're tasked to do. What's the impact? So BTOP itself did have a number of universities that were involved, particularly around the infrastructure side. And some were involved in partnerships with doing more digital literacy training and things like that. There are a lot of lessons from that we see in the new bill, where I think the door is wide open for universities to be part of it. Commerce actually just closed. It's not related to the infrastructure bill. I'll get to that in a second, but they closed a program called Connecting Minority Communities pilot program. This program specifically targeted historically black colleges and universities like NCCU and others, minority serving institutions, and tribal colleges and universities to engage with digital literacy training and so forth, and network access in our communities within the 15 miles right around us. So that was a lesson learned from BTOP that models for universities a way in which universities can use federal dollars to go out and serve the immediate community. So this pilot then will be used for another, it's anticipation that after this 2-year pilot will be another large-scale program for all universities across the country to be able to do that. And through the pilot, we're learning a lot of lessons about how to do this. It's hard. You think it's easy for a university to go do this. It's really hard. How do you get faculty members involved when they're on their march for tenure? How do you get the administrative financial systems to work so that you can fund things out in the public, with procurement laws and things like that? There's a lot of barriers that need to be worked out and be able to, get these things through. And I think this pilot program is helping it. The new bill has a lot of a Digital Equity Act. In there is space for universities to help with technical assistance and training to deal with digital divide. And that's a natural place for us to play. We can do technical assistance to help with even with infrastructure, as well as the digital literacy training, engagement, and those types of things too. So that's where I see a large opportunity, and also to help train those other organizations build capacity to use computers too. So we wrote a grant proposal, and we actually proposed not only providing direct training for coding and things like that, but also working with those community anchor institutions, libraries, schools, nonprofits, civil society organizations, faith-based organizations to help build their capacity to provide more service. And that's a natural for us to do at a university, because we can do that through continuing education. We put our dean's hat on, we say, okay, where do those dollars flow in? This way the dollars can flow in through continuing education. It's a continuing education program. You can give certificates, digital badging through your continuing education unit. And it looks and feels like a really, a very legitimate university program when you do it that way. And so I noticed in the legislation that there's a lot of room for opportunity for universities to be a part of the technical assistance and training side of things. There's another space. So after the BTOP, this criticism came out, the White House and NSF came together and created US Ignite. US Ignite focuses on building those applications to run on these next generation networks. Then you got to remember, all the infrastructure investments created next generation networks, low latency, software defined network capabilities, and things like that. So through that type of infrastructure, US Ignite was formed to work with the university community and the commercial community and say, hey, what kinds of applications can we develop on these advanced networks? And then let's do it in a way that we look at these equity and inclusion issues. So you had some really advanced telepresence tools and around telehealth. And so there's one project that we had at Illinois where we're working with the Veterans Administration in Texas, and they were reaching out to folks right in our backyard in Champaign over this high quality network and doing physical therapy. And with physical therapy, you need very low latency, because in physical therapy, you're saying, move your arm till it hurts. So imagine you got a little bit of lag in there, right? You're gonna have a problem. So US Ignite helped to create a large fund through National Science Foundation to develop these next generation applications. But what I love about it is that they're all focused, not just saying to cherry pick the best of them, the lucrative part of the market, but actually use folks that have been traditionally redlined from the internet to be part of your community that you are using to help develop these applications and so forth. So those are some couple different examples that I've seen that I do see things in the language of the current legislation where I think those doors will remain wide open.
That's very good to hear. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That was a wonderful answer. And at the time, we've built up a big backlog of questions for you.
Okay.
I'm going to start with one by Andy Fellows. He asked, it's about collaboration. And this is very name. Were you collaborating with local governments such as East St. Louis, residents and businesses as you designed the local partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll take East St. Louis, for example. We have many examples, but yeah, East St. Louis, we had The relationship with East St. Louis probably started 15 years before we started CDI, and it continued. And here's the trick, the other side of this you have to think about is Champaign to East St. Louis is 2.5, 3 hours. You think twice about driving, because in the wintertime and so forth. So it took dedication of certain faculty members to be able to do that. But they were able to leverage resources from the university for all the transportation, for housing, working with extension to be able to do that. And we worked in partnership with multiple stakeholders, the county, the city, nonprofits, organizations, community-based organizations, and folks from the city. They're extremely sensitive, folks that live in East St. Louis, to want to be involved. And so we use a lot of participatory approaches to be able to do that, and it made a big difference.
There's a lot of questions here that are going to be, how do you make the magic work? Yeah. Joseph Mertz, though, asks a different question.
Okay.
He's curious, do you have or can you envision a major or minor that focuses on digital inclusion? And what would the core classes be?
Yeah, so I know Joe, we're friends from back at grad school. We used to play basketball against each other 3 times a week. So he and I have talked some about this, but it's I'm thinking about that in terms of our own undergraduate program. And I think it would be a mix of courses that would be around information in society, kind of give the broader perspective about sort of the political or the social technical space in which, students would have to operate and working within their community. And then I think there's a technical component there in terms of the design skills, system analysis and design, kind of the traditional set of classes there too. I think it takes a combination of both those things. I personally, in framing this as I'm thinking about for my own program, I like the social technical perspective because I certainly believe that it's important for undergrads and graduate students not to look at technology as a black box, but I really want them inside of it. Quick example, with many of a couple of the PhD students that were part of the center have gone on to look at biases and algorithms. And I'll never forget, as they were presenting the work, they would talk about what you would see in terms of the internet, in terms of bias. But we'd raise the question about, okay, so then what's happening in the algorithm itself? And these were 2 students that are not computer science people that then rolled up their sleeves, got with computer science folks, took a particular class, and got inside how algorithms work, how big data works, and so forth. And I think that also needs to be very central in this. So I think there has to be that technical component certainly needs to be part of it. And then the experiential learning to be able to go and apply these skills to real world problems. But I think there needs to be a lot of structure in how that experiential learning is done too. So I think there needs to be some buildup so that students can have the comfort and skill set to be able to do that as well. And then also another class I want to throw in there is one about deliberative pedagogy. And that's when I've got a curriculum for that. Again, that would be part of the information society piece to really understand how do you go out and engage, with the public. It's an uncomfortable, very uncomfortable process to go through, but I think that, needs to go with it.
Very good. And I think that's going to be the last question. We've come across time. So please join me in thanking Dr. Gant for this wonderful talk. And I'm going to mail you all the questions, although Sarah may do that as well.
Yeah, that'd be great.
People do want to hear from you.
That'd be great. Well, thank you all. Yeah, thank you all very much, and glad that you were there. And then another shout out to another classmate, Brian Butler. We were in several classes together in our PhD program. I see Brian. Hey, Brian. Good to see you as well, too. So we were all running around campus together, too. So, but yeah, thank you all, and thanks everybody. And if you have any questions, shoot me an email, and I'll take a look at these questions too, and see what I can send out. But thank you all very much. Thank you, and everybody have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and a Happy Holiday.